Hello and welcome to Advancing Pawn. This video is the third in the series Queen's Gambit Declined, Semi-Tarrasch Defense Exchange Variation. In the first video, we saw a detailed study of the opening up to the 10th move. And in the second video, we followed it up with a master game analysis, a game played between Magnus Carlsen and Jeffery Xiong. In this video, we'll see a game between Hikaru Nakamura and Zoltan Gyimesi. The first 10 moves will be the same, so I'll quickly push through the first 10 moves. If you want a detailed study of the opening, you can go back to the first video. I'll give the link in the description box or as a pinned comment below. There is a very interesting difference between the previous master game and this one. The game between Carlsen and Xiong was pretty much drawn throughout. It was almost equal. Whereas materially the game was becoming more and more imbalanced as we went, and it offered us some very interesting positions to analyze. This game is quite the opposite. Materially it looks equal almost till the end, but white keeps edging ahead in terms of positional advantage as we go forward in the game. Okay, let's see how the game goes. d4, queen pawn opening, nf6, Indian game, c4, e6, East Indian defense, nf3, anti-Nimzo-Indian variation, d5, now takes the game into Queen's Gambit Declined, nc3, the three knights variation, c5, Semi-Tarrasch defense, c cross d5, knight cross d5, and e4 now takes the game into Semi-Tarrasch defense exchange variation, which is the opening we are analyzing in detail. Knight takes c3, b cross c3, c cross d4, c cross d4, bishop to b4 check, bishop d2, bishop takes d2 check, queen takes d2, and black castles. As I said, I've quickly pushed through the first 10 moves because we have analyzed these moves in detail in the first opening study video. Let's see how the game goes forward from this point. White's next move is rook to c1. White tries to position its rook along the c file to get control of the open file. What are the other choices for white? White could have gone ahead developing its final minor piece that's left in the back rank. So bc4 looks like the best choice as per Stockfish. The other choices are also good enough. White could have developed bishop to d3. In fact, this is exactly the move that we saw in Carlsen's Xiong game in previous video. White can also develop bishop to e2. Bishop to b5 is also good enough as per the engine, but it kind of prompts black to push a6, and then white will have to run backwards with the bishop again, but it's still looking playable. It's not that bad for white either. But given that there are so many other options, I guess white can develop bishop to c4, d3 or e2. But white actually plays rook to c1 in the game. Black responds with knight c6. It looks natural because black will have to develop its remaining two minor pieces from the back rank, and it goes with knight to c6 first. Stockfish picks b6 as its best choice, with the idea of developing bishop to b7 and then possibly going with the knight to d7. Okay, black plays nc6 in the game. White goes bishop b5. bishop d7, and white castles. So it looks all good so far. The game is more or less even up to this point. And now black goes knight to e5. Stockfish thinks the best choice for black is rook to c8 to counter for white rook's presence along the open file. Black plays knight to e5. And now it doesn't look like a great option for white to capture with the pawn on e5, because after bishop takes on b5, it leaves white with not so great looking pawn structure. Also, if white captures on d7, black has the option of capturing on f3, giving a check first, so white's pawn structure breaks. G pawn will have to move to f3 to recapture the knight, and then queen can take back on d7. So in both of these cases, it looks like white is giving away its slight opening advantage to black. But white simply goes back with the bishop to e2, supporting the f3 knight. Black takes on f3 and cross f3 check. The other option at this stage appears to be knight to g6. Okay, knight cross f3 check, bishop cross f3, and black plays bishop to b5. So here again, for the second time in this game, Stockfish thinks rook to c8 is the best move for black, claiming equal control of the open c5. But for the second time in the game, black doesn't pick the best choice that Stockfish suggests. Black plays bishop to b5 instead. White goes rfd1. The other choice appears to be rfe1. I guess the idea here is all major pieces for white stay on darker squares. So the light squared black bishop will not be able to attack any of those. And that's pretty much the only minor piece that black has left. So it looks like a good strategy to position that way. rfd1 isn't bad either. It looks like an equally good move. It doubles up along the d file and supports the pawn on d4. Queen d7 from black. At this stage, Stockfish thinks queen d6 is the best move for black. Again, I guess the idea is similar. Because white has a light squared bishop, it's probably better for black queen to stay on a darker square to avoid the possibility of being attacked by the minor piece. The other strong choice appears to be bishop to a4, chasing the rook away from its latest developed d1 square. Black didn't take either of these. It went queen to d7. White's next move is d5. Stockfish thinks h3 is quite a good move as well. Let me just go forward a few moves to see one idea of a tactic that white can look for. Let's say black now plays rc8, rook cross c8, rook cross c8, and now d5. Now, black cannot take e cross d5. If black were to take e cross d5, it would be a blunder because bishop to g4 catches black's queen and rook along the diagonal, and when queen moves away, white would win an exchange on c8. So white, having played h3 previously, ends up supporting bishop's move to g4 later for this attack. But white pushes forward with d5 and black takes on d5. Yet again, in this position, Stockfish thinks the best move for black is rook to c8 to counter along the open c file. But though black looks slightly behind on development with rook still in its home square, while white has developed relatively better to the central files, black still goes ahead and opens more files. He crossed d5, and now white plays queen b4. Stockfish thinks simply queen cross d5 is a better move, winning the pawn back. But white plays queen to b4. And now finally, black plays rook to c8. But interestingly, Stockfish thinks it's not the best move for black at this point. When Stockfish actually recommended rook to c8 three times before, black did not play that move at any of those points. And now black finally plays it just at the wrong moment. Right here, Stockfish thinks a5 is actually the best move for black to stay even. And now queen cannot go back to b3 because bishop can then move to a4 and catch the queen and rook along the diagonal. So let's say queen to d2 and then d4, and the engine thinks the game is pretty much even at this point. But black did not play a5. Instead, black finally played rook to c8 when Stockfish did not recommend the move. He crossed d5. d5 is a lone pawn for white now, not supported by a white pawn on either side along the c or e files. But it's a great asset because black doesn't have a pawn either along c, d, or e files. So there's no defense against this advancing pawn. And so it turns out as an asset for white, while it can still be a soft target for black. The engine thinks at this stage white has more than a point advantage, 1 point something, which is equivalent of a pawn and little more, though materially the game looks equal. Rook cross c1, rook cross c1, black rook comes to e8 to try and control the other open file. h3 now from white. In these positions, it's good to keep an exit square for white because there is always a possibility of a back rank mate if white misses out looking for attack at some point. So h3 is good. g6, black chooses to move a pawn along the other file and creates its own exit square. f4. So Stockfish thinks the best move for white is rook to d1, getting behind the pawn and supporting its push forward to d6. So according to the engine, gives away some portion of its advantage by not moving to d1, queen f4. Let's see how the continuation might have possibly gone if white had gone along Stockfish recommendation. Let's say rook to d1, black e2, possibly forcing exchange of the final minor piece remaining on the board. Bishop takes, rook takes on e2. And now white appears to have a hanging pawn on a2, but White can simply ignore that and push forward with d6. Black cannot afford to take on a2. If rook takes a2, it's a blunder because after queen g4, black cannot exchange. If black exchanges on g4, neither the black king nor the rook are in a position to come back and stop the d6 pawn from queening. Black king is far away and rook is prevented from coming to d2 to get behind the pawn, and it doesn't have enough time to get to c2 or e2 and get around to d8 in time to stop the d6 pawn. So black queen will have to move away to avoid the exchange, and then d7. And if black tries rook to c2, white can simply go rook e1, and there's no way black can stop rook to e8 and subsequent queening. Of course, black can sacrifice its queen to stop the d pawn, but it doesn't help. Black is completely lost at this point. But white did not play rook to d1, which is the stockfish recommendation. White's next move in the game is queen to f4. Rook c8. Rook cross c8. Again, here rook to d1 to get behind the pawn is stockfish recommendation. But white takes on c8, queen takes c8. d6, so the pawn grows a little bigger, gets closer to its queening square. And black moves b6. White bishop was attacking the pawn on b7, so b6 consolidates the pawn structure and escapes from the bishop's attack and allowing the queen to move elsewhere. White plays g4 in the game, which is a bad move. So in the sequence of last three moves, white has played two weak moves and thrown away its advantage from a +2 to almost a 0. It's a drawn game now. Black actually did not waste any time. It makes queen e6 its own bad move to push back the advantage to white. Again, white goes +1 here, but black could have played queen to c2 to keep the game even. Let's see how the game could have possibly gone if black had played queen to c2. Let's say g5, queen to b1 check, kh2, and queen cross a2. So now black is a pawn ahead, and it has its own connected passed pawns along A and B files to equalize for the advanced d6 pawn that white is having. Let's say queen to d4, trying to support the d6 pawns push forward, and black can play queen to a4 now, asking white if it wants an exchange of queens and also adding more protection to d7 square. So let's say queen to f6, queen to c4, and this game is in the balance. But black did not play queen to c2. Instead, black played queen e6, which is a weak move. It gives back the advantage to white. Queen to d4. And now comes the biggest blunder in the game. Black plays h5. So black responds to white with its own back-to-back mistakes, a bad move followed by a blunder. And now white's advantage is +5, almost equivalent of 5.5 pawns. It's completely winning here. And as I told you earlier in the video, materially, white and black are exactly equal up to this point. There is no material advantage that white has gained so far, but it's completely winning at this stage. Sharpfish thinks queen to e1 check is a much better option. Even though white has an advantage, it's not as conclusive as it was after h5. The other good choice for black would have been to go back to c8. So it could either attack on e1 or go back to his back rank and add more defense to stop the d6 pawn from promoting. But black did neither of these. It moved h5 to throw the game away. And now bd5 is a very strong move from white. Black cannot capture the hanging pawn on d6 because bishop can simply capture on f7 to give a check, and then black's queen on d6 would be lost. So it would be a trap to capture this free pawn now. Say queen e1 check. This is what happened in the game, but it just comes one move too late in the game. It should have come before h5. h2, h cross g4, queen f6, and now white is threatening to capture the f7 pawn. Black played g3 check. Let me move forward with actual moves in the game to see how it ended, and then we can come back to this point to see if black had any better alternative. g3 check was played in the game. King cross g3, queen g1 check, and white king comfortably hides behind the h3 pawn on h4. And at this point, black resigned in the game. Black queen doesn't have any more checks to give. Along this diagonal, f2 pawn is safeguarding the king, and it's supported by queen on f6. So there is no square that black can get to give a check. Let's say black tries going b8 to protect the f7 pawn. It fails quickly after d7. Bishop cannot take on b7 because it will be mate after qf7 check, kh8, qg8. And e1 doesn't help. Black is now trying to give away its bishop against a very advanced white pawn to see if it can defend the game. But black doesn't have to take on e8 and give away its newly crowned queen. White can simply go forward to d8 and queen. And now white has two queens against black's lone queen. And there's nothing much that black has to play with. So it's completely lost after kh4 and black resigned. Let's go back to this position where we wanted to see if black had a better alternative than g3 check. Let's say black queen tries going back to e8 to add more protection to f7 pawn and also to try and prevent d6 pawn from queening. This is the best that black can do here, but it is still a +8 advantage for white. So it's a clear win, but just makes it slower. It's just slow death for black from here. Now queen g6, because the f7 pawn is pinned by the bishop, queen can capture on g6. King f8, let's say queen f6, threatening queen h8 mate. Maybe king g8, h cross g4. And for the first time, materially going a pawn ahead. So far, it was materially equal in this game. Let's say queen f8, kg3, bishop to e8, g5. So now the pawn is threatening to come forward and add further attack on f7. g7, looking for an exchange. but white doesn't want an exchange here, so let's say queen to e7, threatening to capture on e8. Queen goes back to f8, queen to e5, kh7, f4. So you can see that white takes its own time and steadily builds further pressure, and black has no way out from its hole. Let's say bishop to d7, queen f6, queen to e8. The engine actually thinks f2 is the best move here, but for practical purposes, I think queen cross f7 is much simpler here because it forces a queen exchange with white holding a significant advantage. I think this closes out the game easier. Bishop cross f7, king g7, bishop h5, and let's say a5 now for black to try and counter attack if possible. But bishop g4, chasing the black bishop out of d7. And let's say if bishop tries going to c6, d7 now forces black to sacrifice its own bishop to stop the d pawn from queening. Bishop cross d7, and white is completely winning here. So as you just saw, it was just slower than the other alternatives, but white was still always winning all along. So yeah, instead of g3 check, which was actually played in the game, if black had tried anything else like qe8, it would have just been slower death. So let me just show the actual moves from the game to finish the video. g3 check, king cross g3, g1 check, king h4, and black resigns. And again, the turning point in the game, even though queen to e6 was a weak move, was actually h5 blunder, throwing the game away completely. I hope you enjoyed watching the video and learning along with me. I'll try and come back with more games from the same opening, Queen's Gambit declined, Semi-Tarrasch exchange variation. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you in the next video from Advancing Pawn.